Welcome back. This is week 15 lecture, but it's not really a lecture. The title is simply Preparing for the Final Exam. So this is my talk like I did for midterm 1 and midterm 2. Trying to talk you through the exam, go through the documents that have been posted to help you prepare for the exam so you can do the best you possibly can on it. That's the importance or the intent of this talk. You have all the information you need. The guide to writing the final exam, you should pay very close attention to, because that will go through the exam with you, and it kind of breaks down the question, which I'll talk about as well, and tells you what's expected and what you need to do and what you need to include. The list of terms to know for the final is posted. It hadn't been posted before, but it is now in the module for the final exam. There are, I believe, 15 terms on that sheet, but that is in addition to the list of terms to know for midterm 2 and midterm 1. So in terms of the comprehensive list of terms to know for the final exam, it's the list of terms to know for midterm 1, the list of terms to know for midterm 2, and the list of terms to know for the final exam. That's because the final exam, as I've explained several times, I believe, is comprehensive. So it covers the entire course, and it covers everything that has been assigned and presented, namely all the lectures, all the textbook reading, and all the source readings. You say that's a lot. Yes, it is. But the midterms are designed and were designed to prepare you for this. And I think I mentioned the whole point of the final exam, the whole point of the course is what you kind of take away from the course, and what you've learned by the end of the course is the most important. It also is an important exam because it can be worth up to 90% of your final grade. I think I've explained that as well, going back to the very first documents posted in terms of the introduction to the course and explaining the talk about the introduction to the course, explaining the grading of this course and how it's structured and set up. So that should not be anything new to you, and it's to your benefit. Because if you do better on the final exam than you did on one or both of the midterms, the grade percentage-wise on the final exam will replace your midterm grades. Now, something just about gradings and final grades. I think I said this before, but I'll say it again, just so we can be clear on this. The grade book that you have access to is what I call your raw score. You will never receive a lower grade in the course than your raw score. So at the end of the final, once I've posted the grades for the final exam, whatever is in the grade book, you will not receive a grade lower than that. You may very well receive a higher grade than that. Because once I grade the final exam, I then go back and do the calculations. And percentage-wise, anytime for anybody who has done better in the final exam than the midterms, I then go back and replace those midterm grades. And then I look at the overall structure. I will also then assign the discussion points. And the discussion points, I know people have asked about that. They are not graded per post. The whole point of the discussion is to be engaged throughout the semester with your classmates, going back and forth. And essentially, I just look at the overall profile and make a determination of, have you been engaged? Have you posted? Posting posts on the last day possible doesn't really help. So it's not that big of an issue. I mean, I can see the statistics of your participation throughout the course of the semester. I'm not a major stickler on this. The discussions are designed to help you, and if you don't want to, and if you haven't wanted to make use of that forum for discussing the ideas throughout the course, then that is your prerogative. Just as it's your prerogative not to do the reading, not to listen to the lectures, not to take notes on the lectures and pay good attention, not to use the list of terms to know, Not to read the guide to writing the final exam, not to read, the document historical argument, which I've stressed repeatedly, and also the guide to writing the final exam. I say, stress it again, that you should review that document in terms of writing and preparing for your final exam. That's all up to you. So don't worry about your, discussion grade. If you are doing well and do well in the final, let's say you end up with a 93 or 94% on the final, you're going to get an A in the class. That's simple as that. I'm not going to, say yes, but you get a 2 on the discussions, which would then bring your grade down to A minus or B plus. I'm not going to do that. To me, that would be ridiculous. So don't worry about the discussion grades. If I can say, most people get either a 10 or a 9. Okay. If you really haven't done anything with the discussions, you might get less than a 9. All right. So I don't want to belabor the point, but the focus is the final exam. Okay. So strive with all you can to put your best foot forward and really demonstrate what you've learned from this course. Now, the final exam, too, if it was designed, as I said at the very beginning, as a semester-long project. So it's not something that you can just kind of throw together at the very end and expect to do very well. Now, if you can, more power to you. But I would not think that would be the case, because it's not an issue of information. Just I've said this before, I think, for the midterm 1 and midterm 2 and the course, introduction to the course, explaining what the course is about. This is not a course about information. It's not about learning names and dates and facts and then repeating that on an exam. It is about analysis and understanding and putting it all together in argument. How do you formulate your position based on the course material? In some ways, what's expected, even though this is an assumption that I know is not true for anybody, nor is it true for myself. But kind of the thought experiment I do is that we all know all the information, let's say, perfectly. We all know everything that's been assigned perfectly. And then on that basis, what do you bring from that? How do you analyze that course material to apply it to the given question? What do you bring as evidence to the question? Because once again, the final exam is not asking for your opinion. It's asking for your analysis of the course material. How do you then support your thesis of the question with the evidence from the course material? That's what it's getting at. So once again, as I've said before, historical argument, don't say I think, I believe. I'm not going to grade your opinions. Let's say, for example, I'm assuming you know that the final exam is based on human rights. Let's say you say, I don't believe in human rights. There's no such thing as human rights. It's just a construct, a political construct of various societies. You can say that. I'm not going to grade that, because that is an opinion. Because the whole point is, okay, that may be the case, but I'm not asking you about abstractly, philosophically, are there such things as human rights? What it's asking is the historical appeal to human rights, beginning with John Locke all the way through, has been a historical development. What has been the impact of that? What was the impact of Locke's ideas? And how do those differ from previous ideas in terms of rights and privileges within medieval Christendom and on into early modern Europe? There wasn't a concept of human rights. There were rights and privileges that went along with status in society, not individual human rights. So if you were part of the nobility, you had rights, but you also had responsibilities. If you were part of the peasantry, you had responsibilities, but you also did have rights as a peasant. And a lot of the peasant, in fact, most of the peasant uprisings from the later Middle Ages on into the early modern period, were based on what the peasants or their spokespersons, which were usually city secretaries and such, who were educated to some extent, were literate in any case, who were speaking kind of on behalf of the peasants. And the peasants, keep in mind, especially as we move on into early modern Europe, is a very diverse group because legally, it was everybody who was not a member of the clergy or the nobility was classified legally as a peasant until the French Revolution. So within the early modern period, we still are working with that feudal structure, which does not reflect, quote unquote, the reality on the ground whatsoever when you have very wealthy merchants and bankers and business people all over the place and traders who are not members of the clergy and are not nobility by blood, especially with the development of the new model army and the standing armies. We have a professionalization of the military. You can't even say that the military are those who fight. Far more people were fighting, were part of the military than the nobility. So the issue becomes, what goes with the rights and the privileges of your status, your role in society? As a professor, I have rights and privileges that are not inherent in me as a human being. As a student, you have rights and privileges and responsibilities, as I have responsibilities, that go along with your status as a student at this university. They have nothing to do with you as an individual person. The question is, what are individual human rights and what are rights of status? How do those work together? And when Locke states that they're the inherent rights of life, liberty, and property, what is he talking about and for whom? Is it related to a status? Well, not particularly, because rather than saying for the aristocracy, for those free white males, basically, who are landowners, that is part of the status that have this right. He doesn't say that, even though that is behind it. What he's meaning is for every individual person, at least is what he states. It's not really what he means, but what he states is that there are inherent rights of being human. And those are rights of life, liberty, and property. And then we get a century later, or almost a century later, we get the Declaration of Independence. Jefferson and Franklin, who've been studying Locke, have been members of the Enlightenment thinkers, argue, quote unquote, the same thing basically, but they change it to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Equating property with happiness, maybe, but also maybe realizing that even if you don't own property, you still have individual human rights. But when they say all men are created equal, do they mean all human beings? And we've talked about that. Just as the Declaration of the Rights of Man and a Citizen, drafted anyway by Lafayette, who had been working with the revolutionaries of the American Revolution, states these are the inherent rights of human beings, but of men, of all men, the rights of man and a citizen. And then Olympe de Gouges comes along and says, wait a minute, you're leaving out women, and publishes her Declaration of the Rights of Woman and of Citizen. And what happens to her? She's beheaded for treason. How dare she even suggest that women have rights, because women were seen as property of men, unless they were queens, without kings. Because the queens, who were the wives of the kings, were simply kind of that way. But when we have the queen mothers, who are the rulers from Elizabeth I in England, Catherine de' Medici in Florence, and on we go, and then Catherine the Great in Russia, there's a number of outstanding women rulers, but they were not attached to men. And if you weren't attached to men and you were a woman, if you weren't a political ruler, your options were very limited, because you were legally under the authority of your husband or your father. Now, that development from rights of status within society, rights of roles within society, functions within society, which continued because we still have them. As I said, I have rights, privileges, and responsibilities as a professor, and you have rights, privileges, and responsibilities as a student. Not as a human being, but as your functional role as a student. They don't apply except in this status, this condition. But human rights are individual rights that go with the individual human being. Can there be tensions between individual human rights and the rights and privileges and responsibilities of status? Oh, yes. That's part of the tensions that develop. What does it all mean? And then we go from those few rights of life, liberty, and property / pursuit of happiness to civil rights, to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. When it's like, what we had these concepts of rights, but yet we still had World War II. And isn't war by definition contravening and denying human rights? So if we make a comprehensive universal declaration of what are the rights of individuals as individuals, both for men and women, and if you look at that declaration, it includes it both, so it's every human being, we can prevent war. That was the idea. And eventually we have the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. But those documents are documents basically without force. If rights are based on the military power, the military police power, the coercive force to be recognized and upheld, are they really inherent? Are they really something that go along with us just simply as being human? Or is it just a high ideal that people throw out there? And in our postmodern context, because these are all very modern constructs based on Enlightenment ideals, what's the role of human rights now? And what happens if I have a right as an individual human being, and you have a right as an individual human being, but those two rights contradict each other or inflict upon each other? How do we settle that? That's one of the debates we're experiencing right now. Freedom of speech. What is the freedom of speech? Do I have the freedom of speech to lie publicly? I do, until it starts becoming a problem for other people. Is there a check on the freedom of speech? The famous one, can I get up in the theater and yell fire? Well, I'm free to say what I want. But you cannot endanger other people. You cannot harm other people. But where's the line? And how is it drawn? And who draws it? Courts draw it, which all get back then to, are human rights then actually inherently human rights, or are they the political rights that are granted by the political government power authority and enforced thereby if they are enforced? So if there are universal international rights, does there not need to be then a universal international government to enforce those rights? Those are some of the concepts we're dealing with. It's complex. And your view on it as an individual is fine. I welcome it. I hope this has caused you and allowed you to think about your positions on these things, your opinions and beliefs. I'm not going to grade it, because you are all entitled to your own opinions and beliefs. I'm not going to say this is an A opinion, this is an A belief, this is a D belief or an F belief, because how would I do that? Based on my own, probably, consciously or not. So I'm not going to do that. But what I can grade is how have you analyzed, understood, grasped, and put into an argument the historical development based on the course material. So it's not a matter of what you believe about it. Yes, there's the issue of interpretation. Of course there is. But if you're interpreting the historical documents, the document then of your textbook, the document of my lectures, how do you go about doing that and evaluating that and analyzing that? and then apply it. Those are the skills. That's one of the skills of the liberal arts. How do you analyze information? How do you analyze texts? How do you analyze the past, the historical developments? How do you analyze ideas, not in terms of whether you agree with them or not, but what are those ideas? How do we know what those ideas, what people thought in the past? We have a text. You can say Marx was wrong. Okay, on what basis do you say that? Because I don't believe that. Okay, fine. You don't believe it. Fine. But why is he wrong? On what basis? And how do you evaluate that? Was he wrong about his interpretation of the material dialectic? You could argue why, but then you have to give reasons for it, not just because you don't like it or because you do like it. It goes both ways. And then what were his actual arguments? And how is that different from how later thinkers, politicians, rulers, dictators, tyrants used his ideas? Leninism and Stalinism were not Marxist. Or they're Marxist, but they were not following Marx's ideas. They adapted Marxist ideas and implemented them in a way that Marx said, that won't work because it has to be it is an historical development. And if we're not there yet, we're not there yet. That's what this course is about, to say, okay, how do we understand ideas, positions, developments, and their impact over time based on the evidence? Now, the question is distilled for you in the guide to writing the final exam. I point out what the fundamental central core question is, and then the context, the other questions around it. Read that document. I can pull it up here without clicking off and screwing everything up. I will do so. Here we have it. This is a guide to writing the final exam. And after repeating the exact question, which you've had from the very beginning, first day of class, I said, the most important thing to do is to begin to answer this question, is to analyze it and determine what it is actually asking. The central question is, what was the role of human rights in the emergence and development of early modern and modern Western civilization, and what is the role of human rights in postmodern Western civilization? Now, in some ways, I should have phrased that differently, especially after what I've just said, because I'm not asking you what do you think the role was. I'm asking you, based on the course material, what was the role of human rights in the extant evidence in the emergence and development of early modern and modern civilization? And what is the role of human rights based on the extant evidence of the course material in the postmodern Western civilization? And especially with that latter part, what is the role of human rights in postmodern Western civilization? You are free to speculate. You can then bring in your own position, but make an argument for it. Make an argument for, I think, human rights should be this. Human rights should serve as the basis of an international order. Why? Because we can see that if we follow the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, I didn't even include the International Covenant on Political Rights, but if we include that, if we were to follow it, that would bring peace. That would provide a basis for our postmodern context to bring us into a new paradigm, the paradigm of human rights and equality. Now, I'm not saying that is the case, but you could argue that and say that all along human rights have been an ideal that has not always manifested itself in reality. And there's all kinds of information there and evidence there for that position. Far more than the position of human rights have always been there, fully asserted. Prove it. What's the evidence that the articulations of human rights have ever really been reflective of the reality? That's the question. That's what we're getting at. And I hope you see what I'm talking about. Interpretation is distinct from expression of opinion and belief, even though an interpretation is often an opinion, often a belief. But what is it based on? It's based on the evidence that is available for that interpretation. That's what this is getting. You may say, yeah, but this is a fine line. Yes, it is a fine line, but it's an all-important fine line. Basis of, let's say, reality. What is reality? Reality is based on evidence, on that which is, not that what I want it to be. I can say, this is a world of peace and harmony, and we just have to get along and love each other. I can believe that to be the reality. I could be the hippies from Berkeley, or actually from Ashbury, who came over and joined with the Berkeley and say, "Oh, love and peace, and all we have to do is, smoke marijuana and get high and make love with as many people as possible, and the world will take care of itself." I can believe that. But if I have to form an argument for it as being a practical solution, how do I do so? I could say that might even be, I can make an argument like this, that could be the ideal. But what effect would it bring about, and what would be necessary to have that brought about? It would mean that people would have to be forced into that. And isn't that itself a change? Or I could say, well, it can't be forced, because that is forcing someone to do something is denying their right to self-determination, so to speak. But I could argue that it is an ideal that once everybody comes to understand and adopt, then we'll have peace and harmony and love. So what's necessary for that? Changing human hearts and human beliefs. How do you do that? For one, education. We need to teach people. We need to persuade people. That is almost the same basis as Marx saying we can have a classless society once the proletariat revolution comes about. And what is necessary for that? The class consciousness of the proletariat. That it will come about. And we need to advocate for it. We need to work towards it, but we can't force it. And the attempt to force it was what Lenin and Stalin did. Or any other ideal. Any other ideal works in the same way. But what are the arguments of the course material that would support that thesis? But the question isn't asking, devise your own grandiose idea of human rights in terms of the ideal society. It's saying, what have been the appeals to human rights? In our postmodern world, in some ways, as human rights expand from Locke, American Revolution, French Revolution, through the Universal Declaration and the Economic or the International Covenant, expand, what's going on in the world today? Has the expansion of the realization of rights led to an expansion of the actualization of human rights? Or is it simply the appeals to the proclamation? I have rights, and you can appeal to it all you want, but who pays attention? That is what we're getting at here. And isn't, in some ways, the switch to postmodernity that we're still working with, doesn't that undermine the very concept of human rights? Because it's simply things that we think about. It undermines that objective assertions. What is the basis for our positions? If we don't base it on evidence, what do we have left? Because once the evidence is gone, then we're just talking vanilla ice cream is the best in the world. No, it's not. Chocolate is the best in the world. No, it's not. vanilla is. And because I want everybody to have the best in the world, I'm going to force everybody to have vanilla ice cream and going to ban chocolate ice cream. On what basis? Because I think it's best. That's where our politics have gone in so many ways. And it's not based on any evidence. It's based on individual ideas, opinions, and beliefs. And where has it gotten us, and where is it getting us? We need to come back to interpretation of evidence, of that which is, and what to do about it. So I'm not here arguing that there is one political solution or there is one political position that is correct and the other is wrong. But if we're not debating what the evidence is, what do we do? Take global warming. If I just say, global warming is going to destroy our planet, and if someone else says, global warming is a hoax, no, it's not. Yes, it is. That's the vanilla chocolate ice cream. Let's get back to look at the evidence. Now, for global warming, as in so many other things, what's the best evidence? The scientific data. Who presents the scientific data? Scientists, experts. It's not about, well, I'm all into the environment. I read a book about the environment. I know as much as anybody else. No, it's not. It's based on the expertise, the scholarly expertise. Then we can talk about it, as scientists do. They debate it all the time. With vaccination and the whole COVID issue. Oh my God, Fauci should be, prosecuted because he was lying to us because he told us, first of all, that we should all wear masks. And he comes up and says masks aren't that important. Yes, why? Because science changes as scientists are learning more things. And Anthony Fauci is one of the world's leading experts on infectious diseases and viruses. And so to undermine his expertise is ridiculous just because you don't like it and you think you know as much. That's stupidity. How can we come to an understanding of the evidence, the reality of that which is, and then what to do about it? Because that's a different question. That's a different question. What I'm asking you in this exam is to try to make that distinction. How do you formulate an argument based on your analysis of the evidence and apply it to the question? So that is one thing I want to pay attention to. Make sure you're answering the question that is being asked, the central question that is being asked. Then it goes on to say, you need to address this question in the context of the emergence of early modern Europe, the emergence of modern Europe, and the emergence of postmodern Europe. The background to early modernity, where this course kind of starts, which is also where your textbook starts in the middle of the 17th century, is the myth of Christendom, as I referenced it. And that led to the myth of the nation state. We're talking about the myth of the new individualism, the myth of postmodernity. Myths are not that which is false. Myths are the stories we tell ourselves that allow us to make sense of the world that we experience and in which we find ourselves. They're not necessarily literally true, but there's a truth there. And the myths that we tell ourselves, Western civilization, what is that? That's a myth. Show me Western civilization. What is Western? It depends on where you are. What is civilization? It depends on how you define civilization. How do we put these concepts together? Because what happens is so often also in our educational system, how these things are taught, how history is taught from elementary school through middle school and high school, and so often, unfortunately in my view, but so often at the university, is we take these ideas, these concepts, these myths, and we teach them as if they're real things. What's real things is the evidence that has survived, that you've been reading. You need to base your argument on the sources that have been assigned. The textbook, yes. The lectures, yes. That gives perspective. I mean, the lectures give perspectives and interpretation as well as information. The textbook gives information, but also a perspective. But in the sources that have been assigned, the primary readings of the documents that have been assigned, provide the historical evidence for you to construct your argument. So you need to construct your argument based on those assigned sources. So I would say, okay, make a list of all the assigned sources and try to fit in as many of those as you possibly can as you're making your argument to answer the final. Using the textbook as general information for the context and the development, as well as the lectures for the additional supplementary information and perspective conceptualization of the whole, and put it all together and forcefully present your case to the judge as a legal argument that you make your case based on the evidence and present all of that. And I'm the judge. That's what this is about. Now, I hope that helps. I'm not going to beat the proverbial dead horse. I hope that helps. If you have questions, again, please feel free to email me. There are no extensions on the final. The final, as I said from the very beginning, is the only absolute due date. And, I will get your finals graded as soon as I possibly can. I have a deadline for submission of final grades. The raw score that you will see in the grade book after I post the grades for the final exam may or may not be your final grade. It is, you will not receive a lower grade than that, as I've said. I will then do the recalculations, comparing, your percentage score in the final with the midterms, make those calculations, then look at the overall profile, and then assign a final grade, which I submit separately from the Canvas grade book. It's possible that for that final submission that you can just import the grades from the grade book. I think a lot of people do that. A lot of instructors do that. I don't. I do it all by hand individually because I think it's important to look at the individual cases. And we go from there. Then once those grades have been posted or submitted, I think it's 24 hours until they're available to you. So I don't want to, receive emails after I, post the grades of the final exam saying, and then you'll see in the grade book, the final score, even before I do all the different calculations. Why did I get this score? You said this was. Like, I'm not going to respond to those until afterwards. I'm not going to respond to questions about your final, why you got the grade you did, until after the final grades are submitted. But then I will happily go over with you why you received the grade you did on the final. I will happily do that, but not until after final grades are submitted. And if I've made an error, I can change your grade. I will always change a grade if I've made an error that is lower than it should be. I will never change your grade from a higher grade to a lower grade. So if you say, if you got let's say you got a B on the final exam and a B in the course, if you say, I think I deserve an A, and we go back over it, and I say, no, actually you deserve a C, I'm not going to go back and change your grade from a B to a C. But if you say I deserve an A, if I thought, oh, actually, yeah, you're right, you do. I'm sorry. I'm not sure why I did it that way. I will go back and change it to an A. I hope that makes sense. I don't think I've ever had that case except for the math. So if I've gotten the math wrong, that's a clear case. It's not even an issue for discussion. I will change your grade if I've screwed up with my calculations and the result is you getting a lower grade than you earned. So that's kind of the parameters for all this. Try to have fun with this exam. I know you might be saying, shut up. How can we have fun with this exam? Our whole grade depends on it. Yes, it does. But try to say, okay, these are the issues, and these issues are important. What do I think about it? Where do I stand on some of these issues and points? And why? Why? How do I support my position? Those are the questions involved. And that can be fun and exhilarating. Present your case as best as you possibly can. That means also proofread it. As I said before, don't just write your final sentence and then hit submit. Proofread it. Make sure it represents you, because what you submit represents you. Put your best foot forward. Make sure you put your best foot forward. Make sure, analogously, that you're wearing the proper clothes, that you look really good. Take that extra time and care to look in the mirror one more time and say, okay, is my hair all okay? Does my, does my makeup go with my dress? Does my tie go with my shirt and pants or whatever? Make sure you, quote unquote, look good and look your best in submitting your midterm. That represents you. After you've submitted it, after you've seen your final grade, whatever it might be, I hope at some point you'll stop and reflect and have the experience of, wow, I really got something out of that course. I understand things much better now. And it forced me to change how I view things. Even if that is just simply a more in-depth, sophisticated view of what I had believed before, but now I have actual reasons and evidence for it. And I can articulate an argument for my position where I couldn't before. Or maybe it completely changed how I view everything. That is what it's all about. That's what it's all about. Anyway, thank you. I've enjoyed this very much. I hope you will, at least once you submit your final exam. And this was a valuable course for you. And I wish you all the best. And I will see you sometime, perhaps, down the road. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.